I bought 1,000 acres of land because I wanted peace. No noise. No people. Just open space. And for a while, that's exactly what I got. Until one morning, I woke up to a letter sitting at the edge of my property. Not from a neighbor. Not from the county. It was from an HOA. At first, I thought it was a mistake. My land wasn't part of any neighborhood. It wasn't even close. Or at least, that's what I believed. But the letter was very clear. It said I was violating community rules. On land I owned. That's when things started to feel off. So I drove out to the edge of my property, where the land meets this perfectly organized neighborhood. Clean streets. Identical houses. Everything looked controlled. Too controlled. And then I noticed something strange. There were pipes running along the ground. Old ones. Not marked. Not maintained. And they didn't stop at the neighborhood. They ran straight onto my land. At that point, I still didn't think much of it. But later that day, someone from the HOA showed up at my gate. And the way they spoke to me, it wasn't a request. It sounded like a warning. I didn't respond right away. I just stood there, looking at the letter again, trying to figure out how any of this made sense. I had owned this land for a few months now. I went through all the paperwork. There was no mention of any HOA. No shared agreements. Nothing. So I decided to ignore it. At least for a day. I had other things to focus on anyway. The land was big. Way bigger than anything I had handled before. I spent most of my time checking fences, walking the fields, making sure everything was in order. It was quiet out there. The kind of quiet that makes you forget the world exists. But that quiet didn't last. The next morning, I found another letter. Same place. Same tone. But this time, it was more direct. It listed violations. It said I had unauthorized structures near the boundary line. That I was affecting the visual standards of the community. And that if I didn't fix the issue, there would be penalties. Penalties. I remember reading that word twice. Because again, this wasn't their land. So I got in my truck and drove toward the neighborhood. I wanted to see exactly where this HOA even started. The closer I got, the more everything looked perfect. Lawns trimmed the same height. Mailboxes aligned. Not a single thing out of place. It didn't feel natural. It felt controlled. I stopped near the entrance. There was a sign with the community name, polished and clean. Under it, a smaller sign that said, Private Community. HOA enforced. That's when I saw someone walking toward me. He looked like he belonged there. Confident. Calm. Like he had done this before. He introduced himself as part of the HOA board. Didn't ask who I was. Didn't ask why I was there. He already knew. He started talking about rules. About standards. About how my property was impacting the neighborhood. I let him talk. Then I asked him one simple question. How does any of this apply to me? He paused for a second. Not long. Just enough to show he wasn't expecting that. Then he said something that didn't sit right with me. You're connected to this community, whether you realize it or not. Connected? That was the first time I heard that word. And the way he said it, it wasn't a suggestion. It sounded like a fact. I didn't argue. I just nodded and got back in my truck. But on the drive back, I kept thinking about it. Connected how? There were no shared roads. No shared fences. No contracts. At least, none that I knew of. When I got back to my land, I didn't go inside. I stayed outside and walked along the edge again. Slowly this time. Paying attention. That's when I noticed the pipes again. But now, I looked closer. They weren't random. They were placed with purpose. And they weren't just passing through. They were connected to something deeper underground. I followed the line of pipes as far as I could. They weren't new. The metal was worn, slightly rusted in places, but still solid. Whoever installed them knew exactly what they were doing. This wasn't random work. It was planned. The strange part was how they were hidden. From the road, you couldn't see them. From a distance, they blended into the land. But up close, it was obvious. They had been there for years. Maybe longer. I crouched down and brushed some dirt off one section. There was a marking on it. Faded, but still visible. A company name. I didn't recognize it. That's when I started to feel it. That quiet feeling you get when something doesn't add up. I stood up and looked back toward the neighborhood. From where I was standing, I could see the rooftops. Clean. Perfect. Everything in place. And then I looked down at the pipes again. They were running directly toward those houses. Not around them. Not near them. Straight into them. I pulled out my phone and took a few pictures. Just in case. I didn't know what I was looking at yet, but something told me I'd need proof. That's when I heard a sound behind me. A vehicle. I turned around and saw a black SUV coming down the dirt path. Slow. Careful. Like they didn't want to draw attention. It stopped a few feet away. The same guy stepped out. The HOA board member. This time, he wasn't smiling. He didn't greet me. Didn't introduce himself again. Just looked at me, then at the pipes. You shouldn't be out here, he said. Not can you leave. Not this is private. Just, you shouldn't be here. I asked him why. He didn't answer right away. He just walked closer, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning the ground like he was checking something. Then he said, this area is part of a managed system. Managed system. Another strange phrase. I told him this was my land. He nodded slowly, like he already knew that. Ownership doesn't always mean control, he replied. That line stuck with me. Because it didn't sound like a warning. It sounded like a rule. I stepped back and looked at him for a second. Tried to read his expression. But there was nothing there. No anger. No frustration. Just calm. Too calm. I asked him directly, what are these pipes? He glanced down for a second. Then back at me. Old infrastructure, he said. That's all you need to know. And just like that, he turned around and walked back to his SUV. No explanation. No details. Nothing. He got in, started the engine, and drove off the same way he came. Slow. Quiet. Like he was never there. I stood there for a while after that. Just looking at the ground. At the pipes. At the direction they were heading. Because now, it wasn't just strange. It felt intentional. Like there was something I wasn't supposed to find. Something they assumed I'd never question. But now I was. And the more I thought about what he said, ownership doesn't always mean control, the more it started to bother me. Because if I owned this land, then what exactly was I not controlling? That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I went back through all my documents. Every file from the purchase. Every map. Every note. I spread everything out on the table and started checking line by line. At first, nothing stood out. The boundaries were clear. The acreage matched. No shared access points. No easements listed. At least, none that were obvious. But then I noticed something small. A reference to an older survey. Not the one I received when I bought the land. An older one. Dated years back. It wasn't included in my main paperwork, just mentioned in a single line. Easy to miss. So I searched for it. It took a while. Old county records aren't exactly organized. But eventually, I found it. And that's when things started to shift. The older survey showed something different. Not the land itself. The land was the same. But there were markings on it. Lines. Underground paths. Running from one end of the property straight toward the direction of the neighborhood. The same direction as the pipes. I zoomed in on the document. Tried to make sense of the labels. Some of them were faded. Hard to read. But one word was still clear. Water. I leaned back in my chair and just stared at it. Because now it wasn't a guess anymore. Those pipes weren't random. They were part of something bigger. Something planned. I went back outside the next morning. Same spot. Same area. But this time, I wasn't just looking. I was tracing. I followed the path from the map as closely as I could. Step by step. Matching what I saw on paper with what was actually on the ground. And it lined up. Almost perfectly. Every turn. Every direction. It all matched. That's when I realized something else. The pipes weren't just passing through my land. They were starting from it. I kept walking, further than I had before. Past the open field. Toward a lower area I hadn't paid much attention to. The ground there felt different. Slightly damp. Even though it hadn't rained in days. I knelt down and touched the soil. Wet. Not surface level wet. Deeper. Like water was moving underneath. I looked around and noticed something I hadn't seen before. A small structure. Old. Almost hidden by overgrown grass. It didn't look important at first. Just a box made of concrete with a metal cover on top. But when I got closer, I could hear it. A low sound. Faint, but steady. Like water flowing. I stood there for a second, just listening. Then I reached down and pulled the cover open. Inside, there were pipes. Bigger ones this time. Clean. Maintained. Not abandoned. Not forgotten. Active. Water was moving through them. Fast. And all of it was heading in one direction. Toward the neighborhood. I closed the cover slowly and stepped back. Because now it was clear. This wasn't just infrastructure. This was a supply. And it wasn't coming from the city. It was coming from my land. Which meant one thing. Everything that neighborhood depended on was running right beneath my feet. I didn't touch anything after that. I just stood there, staring at the cover I had just closed, replaying everything in my head. The pipes. The map. The way that guy spoke to me. Ownership doesn't always mean control. Now it made sense. But at the same time, it didn't. Because if all of this was real, then how was it even possible? How does an entire neighborhood depend on something that runs through land they don't own? I walked back slowly, trying to stay calm, but my mind was racing. When I got inside, I didn't sit down. I went straight back to the documents. This time, I wasn't looking at boundaries. I was looking for anything related to water. Anything. It took a while, but eventually I found something buried deep in the paperwork. A section most people would probably skip. Utility access. At first, it looked standard. Basic legal language. Nothing unusual. But then I read one line again. And then again. It mentioned historical water routing agreements. Historical. Not current. Not active. Historical. That word changed everything. Because it meant this wasn't something new. This had been set up a long time ago. Possibly before I even bought the land. maybe even before the neighborhood existed. I kept reading. There was no clear agreement attached. No active contract. Just a reference. Like something used to exist, but didn't anymore. I leaned back and took a deep breath. Because now I had two facts. The water was coming from my land. And there was no clear, active agreement allowing it. That's when I realized something else. They knew. The way the HOA member talked to me, the way he avoided giving details, the way he showed up exactly when I started looking around. This wasn't a surprise to them. They were aware of it. And they didn't want me to figure it out. I grabbed my phone and went through the photos I took earlier. Zoomed in on the pipes. On the markings. On everything I had captured. I wasn't just looking anymore. I was documenting. Because now this wasn't about curiosity. This was about leverage. But I didn't act right away. I waited. I wanted to see what they would do next. And it didn't take long. Later that evening, I got another notice. This one wasn't left at the edge of the property. It was delivered directly to my door. More formal. More aggressive. It listed multiple violations now. Things I hadn't even been warned about before. And at the bottom, there was a deadline. 7 days. Or further action would be taken. I read it slowly, line by line. And this time, I didn't feel confused. I didn't feel frustrated. I felt something else. Because now I understood the situation. They were pushing harder. Trying to pressure me. Trying to make me comply before I fully understood what I had. But it was too late. I already knew. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized something important. They weren't in control. They just thought they were. The next morning, I didn't rush into anything. I went back out to the same spot, but this time I didn't just look around. I observed. Quietly. Carefully. I wanted to see how active the system really was. It didn't take long. About an hour after sunrise, I heard it again. That low, steady movement beneath the ground. But this time, it wasn't just from the main structure. It was coming from multiple directions. Like a network. I walked along the line again, following the path I had mapped out in my head. Every few hundred feet, there were small signs. Subtle changes in the ground. Slight dips. Different soil color. Markers. Not obvious to most people. But once you saw one, you started seeing all of them. And they all pointed in the same direction. Toward the neighborhood. I stopped near one section where the pipe ran closer to the surface. You could almost feel it under your feet. A faint vibration. Active. Consistent. Reliable. This wasn't some abandoned system from years ago. This was still in use. Every single day. I stood there for a moment, then looked back toward the houses in the distance. People were outside now. Walking dogs. Driving to work. Living normally. Completely unaware. Or maybe not completely. Because something still didn't add up. If this was their main water source, then someone had to be maintaining it. Someone had to be checking it. Monitoring it. And that meant one thing. They had access. Somewhere. I started walking again, but this time I changed direction. Instead of following the pipe deeper into my land, I moved closer to the boundary. Closer to where my property met theirs. And that's when I found it. A small access point. Hidden behind a line of trees. It looked newer than the rest. Cleaner. Less worn down. There was a lock on it. Not old. Not rusted. Recent. I stepped closer and examined it. The ground around it was slightly disturbed. Like it had been opened not too long ago. Which meant someone had been there. Recently. I didn't touch the lock. I didn't need to. Just seeing it was enough. Because now I knew for sure. They weren't just using the system. They were actively managing it. On my land. Without saying a word. I took a few more photos. Different angles. Close-ups. Wide shots. I made sure everything was clear. Then I stepped back and looked at the whole picture. The pipes. The source. The access point. All connected. All leading to one conclusion. This wasn't just something they inherited. This was something they depended on. Every day. And the fact that they never mentioned it. That they tried to pressure me instead of explaining anything. That told me everything I needed to know. They didn't want a conversation. They wanted control. But now, for the first time since this started, that control wasn't in their hands anymore. I didn't confront them right away. There was no point rushing it. If they were hiding this, then they already knew how important it was. And if they knew that, then they also knew what would happen if it stopped working. So instead of reacting, I slowed down. I started paying attention to patterns. When the system was most active. When the pressure felt stronger under the ground. When the access point looked recently used. It wasn't random. There were specific times during the day when the flow increased. Early morning. Late evening. Peak usage. That told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a backup line. This was their main supply. I went back inside and started organizing everything I had. Photos. Documents. Notes. I laid it all out in order. Step by step. Not just what I found, but when I found it. Because timing mattered now. If this turned into something bigger, I needed to be precise. Clear. Undeniable. That's when I noticed something else in the documents. A small clause I had overlooked before. It mentioned right of access for maintenance, but it didn't specify who had that right. No names. No signatures. Just a general statement. Vague. Too vague. And that was a problem. Because if there was no clear agreement, then technically, no one had the right to be there. Which meant every time someone opened that access point, they were entering my property without permission. I leaned back in my chair and let that sink in. Because now this wasn't just about water. This was about trespassing. Control. And risk. I looked at the notice they sent me again. The one with the 7-day deadline. It felt different now. Before, it looked like pressure. Now, it looked like desperation. Like they were trying to force a quick outcome before anything changed. Before I acted. Before I understood. But I already did. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized something important. I didn't need to argue with them. I didn't need to respond to their letters. I didn't even need to explain what I knew. Because the moment I did, they would know that I knew. And that would change everything. So I stayed quiet. I let the deadline get closer. I let them think I was still confused. Still unsure. Still trying to figure things out. Meanwhile, I kept watching. 2 days later, I saw it happen. A truck pulled up near the access point. Not marked. No logos. Just a plain vehicle. 2 people stepped out. They didn't look around much. Didn't hesitate. They walked straight to the locked cover, opened it, and started working. Like it was routine. Like they had done it many times before. I stayed far enough that they wouldn't notice me. But close enough to see what they were doing. Adjusting something. Checking pressure. Making sure everything was running. Then they closed it back up, locked it, and left. No record. No permission. Nothing. I waited until they were gone, then walked over. The lock was back in place. Everything looked normal again. But now I had confirmation. Not just theory. Not just documents. Proof. And standing there, looking at that locked cover, I realized something else. They weren't just using my land. They were relying on me without even realizing it. By the time the deadline came around, I hadn't responded to a single notice. No calls. No emails. Nothing. And that silence, it clearly bothered them. Because early that morning, I heard a vehicle pull up again. Not near the access point this time. Right at my gate. I stepped outside and saw two people standing there. Different from before. Dressed more formally. One of them holding a folder. They didn't wait long before calling out. "Sir, we need to speak with you." The tone was different now. Still firm, but less confident. I walked up slowly, keeping the distance between us. They introduced themselves as representatives of the HOA. Not board members this time. Something higher. They started explaining the situation again. The violations. The standards. The same script I had already heard. But this time, I noticed something. They weren't making eye contact for long. They kept glancing past me. Toward the land. Toward the direction of the pipes. Like they were checking something without saying it. I let them talk. Didn't interrupt. Didn't argue. Then one of them paused and asked, "Have you reviewed the notices we sent?" I nodded. "Good," he said. "Then you understand the importance of resolving this quickly." Quickly. That word again. Everything about this felt rushed now. Pressed. Like they were trying to close something before it opened. I asked them a simple question. "What happens if I don't?" They looked at each other for a brief second. Then the other one answered. "There will be consequences." Vague. Careful. But not specific. I nodded again. Then I asked another question. "Do those consequences include access to my property?" That's when everything changed. Just slightly. But enough to notice. The one holding the folder tightened his grip. The other one shifted his stance. They didn't answer right away. And in that silence, I got my answer. They knew. Or at least, they suspected. One of them finally spoke. "We're here to maintain a good relationship with all surrounding properties." Not a denial. Not a confirmation. Just a careful line. I stepped back and looked at them for a moment. Then I said, "Because from what I've seen, someone's been accessing my land without permission." That hit. I could see it. Not panic. But tension. The kind you can't hide completely. They didn't respond directly. Instead, they tried to steer the conversation back to the violations. Back to the notices. Back to the pressure. But it didn't work anymore. Because now the roles were shifting. Slowly. Quietly. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse them. I just stood there letting the silence do the work. And the longer it lasted, the more uncomfortable they became. Eventually, they stopped talking, closed the folder, and said they would follow up soon. Then they left. No threats this time. No deadlines repeated. Just distance. I watched them drive away, then turned back toward the land. Everything looked the same. Quiet. Open. Still. But it didn't feel the same anymore. Because now, they weren't the ones setting the pace. I was. That same evening, I went back out to the access point. Not to open it. Just to stand there. Just to think. The air was still. No movement. No sound except the faint hum beneath the ground. Steady. Constant. Like it had always been there. But now it felt different. Now I knew what it meant. I stayed there for a while, then slowly walked along the line again, following the path back toward the source. Every step felt more deliberate this time. More controlled. Because I wasn't guessing anymore. I understood the system. And more importantly, I understood their position. They couldn't afford a disruption. Even a small one. Not for long. The next morning, I made a decision. I didn't call them. I didn't send a letter. I didn't argue. I simply changed one thing. Something small. Legal. Within my rights. I went to the main control point, the one near the source, and made an adjustment. Nothing drastic. Nothing damaging. Just enough. Then I stepped back and waited. It didn't take long. By mid-morning, I could feel the difference. The flow under the ground had shifted slightly. The pressure wasn't as strong. Still running. But not the same. And if I could feel it out here, they would notice it in there. I went back inside and sat down. No rush. No stress. Just waiting. About an hour later, I saw the first sign. A vehicle entered the neighborhood faster than usual. Not speeding, but not normal either. Then another. And another. Activity. Unusual activity. By early afternoon, I heard it again. A truck pulling up near the access point. I didn't go out this time. I watched from a distance. Same routine as before. They opened it. Checked something. But this time, they stayed longer. Moving quicker. Talking more. One of them even stepped away and made a call. I couldn't hear what he was saying. But I didn't need to. I already knew. Something had changed. And they were trying to fix it. By evening, things got even more interesting. Another vehicle showed up. Not a maintenance truck this time. Something official. 2 people stepped out. Different posture. Different energy. They walked straight to the access point and waited. Like they were expecting something. Or someone. That's when my phone rang. Unknown number. I let it ring once. Twice. Then I answered. There was a pause on the other end. Then a voice. Calm. Careful. We need to talk. Not a request. Not a demand. Something in between. I didn't respond right away. I just listened. And in that silence, they said something that confirmed everything. This situation affects more than just your property. I looked out toward the land. Toward the direction of the pipes. Toward the neighborhood that had been trying to control something they didn't understand. And for the first time since this started, they weren't talking about rules. They were talking about consequences. I didn't agree to meet them right away. I told them I'd call back. Then I ended the call and just sat there for a moment, letting it settle in. They had never asked to talk before. They had sent notices. Warnings. Deadlines. But now, they were asking. That shift mattered. I stepped outside again and walked toward the edge of the property. From there, I could see movement inside the neighborhood. More than usual. People standing outside. Talking. Looking around. Something was off. Not a full disruption. But enough to be noticed. I didn't change anything else. I didn't need to. The small adjustment I made was doing exactly what I expected. It wasn't breaking the system. It was exposing it. I went back inside and waited a little longer before calling the number back. They picked up immediately. No delay. Like they were waiting for it. This time, the tone was different. More controlled. More careful. We'd like to come to an understanding, the voice said. Understanding. Another new word. I asked them what that meant. There was a pause. Then they said, "We believe there may have been a lack of communication regarding certain infrastructure." A lack of communication. That was their way of saying it. Without actually saying it. I didn't correct them. I just listened. They continued, explaining that the system had been in place for years. That it served the entire community. That it was critical. That word stood out. Critical. I asked them a simple question. Is there an active agreement for it? Silence. Longer this time. Then finally, "We are currently reviewing documentation." Which meant no. Or at least, nothing they could show. I walked slowly back toward the house as they kept talking. About cooperation. About mutual benefit. About resolving things peacefully. It sounded different from before. Less like authority. More like negotiation. When they finished, I didn't answer right away. I let the silence sit again. Then I said something simple. Access to my property stops until everything is clear. No raised voice. No emotion. Just a statement. They didn't push back. Not directly. Instead, they asked what I needed. That question changed everything. Because a few days ago, they weren't asking me anything. Now they were waiting for my terms. I looked out across the land again. The same land they had tried to control. The same land they depended on. And for the first time since this started, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was deciding. I told them we would need to go through everything properly. Documents. Permissions. Terms. All of it. No shortcuts. No assumptions. They agreed. Quickly. Too quickly. Because they didn't really have a choice. I ended the call and stood there for a moment, just listening again. The low sound under the ground was still there. Steady. Controlled. But now, it wasn't just a system running beneath my land. It was leverage. And they finally understood that. The next few days were quiet. Too quiet. No more letters. No more visits. No trucks near the access point. It was like everything had paused at the same time. But I knew better than to assume it was over. Silence like that doesn't mean nothing is happening. It usually means everything is happening, just out of sight. I kept checking the land every morning. Walking the same paths. Watching the same areas. The system was still running, but the activity around it had changed. No one was touching it. No one was maintaining it. Which meant they were waiting. Probably reviewing everything. Documents. Records. Trying to figure out what they could actually claim. I did the same. I contacted the county office and requested every record tied to the land going back as far as possible. Not just ownership. Infrastructure. Utilities. Any registered agreements. It took time. But when the files came in, they filled an entire folder. Old maps. Survey notes. Property transfers. And buried deep inside, I found it. A reference to a water routing agreement. Not recent. Not even close. Decades old. Signed by a previous owner of the land, long before I bought it. And more importantly, it had an expiration. I read that date twice. Because it had already passed. Years ago. Which meant whatever permission they once had was no longer valid. I sat there for a while, just holding that document, letting it sink in. Because now everything was clear. The system had been built legally. At some point. But it was never updated. Never renewed. And somehow, it just kept running. As if nothing had changed. As if ownership didn't matter. As if no one would ever question it. I made copies of everything. Organized it properly. Dates. Signatures. Details. All lined up. Then I went back outside again. Same path. Same direction. When I reached the access point, I noticed something new. The ground around it hadn't been touched since the last time. No fresh marks. No tire tracks. Still locked. Still quiet. They were staying away. Careful now. Because they knew the situation had shifted. I stood there for a moment, then looked out toward the neighborhood again. From this distance, it still looked perfect. Clean. Controlled. Untouched. But I knew what was running underneath it. And more importantly, I knew it didn't belong to them anymore. Later that afternoon, I got another call. Same number. This time, they didn't waste time. We've reviewed the records, the voice said. Calm. Measured. We'd like to meet and discuss terms. Terms. Not rules. Not violations. Terms. I didn't answer right away. I just listened. Because now, for the first time since this started, they weren't telling me what to do. They were asking what I wanted. I didn't meet them right away. I set a time 2 days later. Gave them enough space to think. Enough time to understand exactly where they stood now. When the day came, they didn't show up casually. 3 people this time. One of them I recognized from before. The others were different. More formal. More careful. They didn't waste time with introductions. They knew why they were there. We stood near the edge of the property. Not too close to the access point. Not too far either. Close enough that we all understood what was beneath us. They started the conversation. Calm. Controlled. They talked about cooperation. About long-term solutions. About how the system had served both sides. I listened. Didn't interrupt. Then one of them finally said it. We'd like to continue using the water source. Not demand. Not assumption. A request. I asked them one question. Under what agreement? There was a pause. They looked at each other again, just like before. Then one of them said, we're prepared to establish a new one. New. That word mattered. Because it meant they were starting from zero. I nodded slowly, then reached into the folder I brought with me and pulled out the documents. The old agreement. The expiration. Everything clearly marked. I handed it to them. They took their time reading it. Carefully. Line by line. No one spoke while they did. But I could see it on their faces. They already knew. They just didn't expect me to have it. When they finished, they didn't argue. Didn't deny anything. They simply closed the folder and handed it back. What are your terms? One of them asked. Straight to the point. No more pressure. No more control. Just that question. I didn't answer immediately. I let the silence sit again. Then I told them exactly what needed to happen. No access without written permission. No maintenance without notice. Full legal agreement. Clear terms. And compensation. Not just for the land, but for everything that had been happening without permission. They listened. Didn't interrupt. Didn't push back. Because they couldn't. After a moment, one of them nodded. Slowly. We can work with that. Just like that. No arguments. No threats. No mention of violations. Everything they had said before, gone. We stood there for a few seconds after that. Quiet. Still. The same land. The same space. But it felt completely different now. Because the balance had shifted. They weren't managing anything anymore. They were asking. And as they turned to leave, one of them paused for a second and looked back. Not at me. At the land. Like they were seeing it differently now. Like they finally understood what it really was. Not just property. Not just open space. But the one thing they couldn't control anymore. And as they walked away, the ground beneath us stayed the same. Quiet. Steady. But now every drop that moved through it was moving on my terms.